The video showed Mrs. Cole standing in our living room at 1:17 p.m., photographing our bank statements with her phone. We watched it 3 times before I could speak. Jason sat next to me on the couch, his face pale. The footage was clear. She'd unlocked our front door like she owned the place, walked straight to the desk, and spent 15 minutes going through our papers. She photographed my passport, Jason's student ID with his social security number, our lease agreement. Then she checked the bedroom, opened a few drawers, and left. I felt sick. Jason kept whispering, "How?" like there was a reasonable version of any of this. I tried to replay the morning in my head. Keys, mail, the moved coffee mug I'd complained about, and it stopped feeling random. That mug was the final straw, sure, but this told me it had been going on since we moved in. She didn't rummage like a burglar. She moved with purpose, like she'd done it before. I said finally. She knew exactly where to look. Jason nodded, still staring at the paused frame where her phone flashed over our bank routing number. He asked if we should call the landlord. I said not yet. I wanted to understand what we'd missed. We'd moved into the Portland apartment in September 2023. Small 2-bedroom second floor of an old brick building with thin walls and a hallway that always smelled like someone else's cooking. The first week was quiet until Mrs. Patricia Cole from downstairs showed up with apple pie. She was around 70, gray hair perfectly styled, always smiling. She stood in the doorway with that tilted head thing and asked questions for 20 minutes. What do you do? What hours? Where from? How long do you think you'll stay? Jason told her he worked 9 to 6 at the office, Monday through Friday. I said I'm a freelance photographer. Weddings, product shoots, whatever pays. And my schedule's all over. She lit up at that, said if we needed anything, she was always home. I laughed politely and said thank you. She didn't leave until I hinted we still had half the kitchen in boxes. When the door closed, Jason joked, "New grandma." I said she was just lonely. I didn't think much about how specific her questions were. I remember she glanced at the deadbolt while I was talking, like she was taking inventory. Maybe that's me rewriting it, but seeing the video made a lot of small moments line up. About a week later, I started noticing small things. My makeup bag was on the wrong bathroom shelf. I keep it under the mirror, far left. One afternoon, it was moved to the right side next to Jason's shaving stuff. My laptop on the desk was closed when I'd left it open that morning. Nothing missing, just touched. I told Jason I was probably being paranoid. He said, "It's fine, you've been stressed." But then his wallet ended up in a different jacket pocket, and he stopped saying I was imagining it. He held it up and said, "I don't put it here." We checked for drafts and wobbly shelves like it could be gravity. Dumb, I know, but you look for normal first because the other option makes your skin crawl. Mrs. Cole kept showing up with baked goods. Banana bread, blueberry muffins, another pie. Always at the exact time we were home together. I remember Jason whispering, "How does she know?" I asked her once lightly, "You have great timing." She laughed and said, "Oh, I just listen." And I didn't like how that sounded after it left her mouth. Another time, through the cracked door, she mentioned seeing me leave around 3 in the afternoon the day before. I froze because I'd slipped out quietly at 2:40. No goodbye text, no call, and I'm careful about that stuff. She also asked how my shoot in Beaverton went. I'd only told the client and Jason. Not even Instagram stories because the client wanted privacy. I said it was fine and asked who told her I was in Beaverton. She shrugged like I was being silly and said, "Oh, you young people always going somewhere." Then handed me muffins and stared a second too long into the apartment, eyes flicking to the desk. That night I told Jason, "We need to change the locks." He said, "Leases usually don't let you," which is true, and then we argued about whether to talk to the landlord or buy a door camera first. I went in circles. If we accuse her and we're wrong, we're the jerks. If we don't say anything and we're right, we're idiots. The next morning, the desk chair was nudged out from the edge again. I pushed it in. It scraped the same little mark on the floorboard I'd noticed 2 days earlier. I started keeping mental snapshots, where the pen sat, angle of the notebook, lid on the external drive. I told myself maybe I was overcompensating. And then, 2 days after that, I came home and the battery on my spare camera body was dead, even though I'd left it charged. Jason didn't touch it. I asked him twice. He got annoyed and said, I said no. Mrs. Cole knocked at 7 with a loaf and said, You must be exhausted after that late drive. Even though Jason and I had come up the back stairs without talking to anyone. I felt my face heat. I smiled, said thank you, closed the door. Then I walked straight to the desk, lined up everything exactly, and took a picture. I started taking photos of how I left things before going out. Jason noticed fresh scratches on our door lock 2 days later. New, not from our keys. He said, These weren't here yesterday. We checked every window, all were locked from inside. We called a locksmith. He shined a light into the cylinder and said, Looks like a pick or the wrong key. He swapped the lock and reminded us to limit spare copies. For an hour, we felt safer. The next morning, my work folder with contracts sat open on the desk, even though I remembered zipping it and taking a photo. Nothing missing, just handled. Jason said, Hidden camera. It was the only way to be sure without accusing anyone. We bought a motion sensor camera and tucked it on the bookshelf, angled at the front door. Then we both left for the whole day. He went to the office. I shot a wedding. Before leaving, I zipped the folder, aligned the chair with the floor mark, and took photos. When we got home that evening, we opened the app together. My hands shook as I hit play, shaking. Clip 1, us leaving. Then hours of nothing. Then, at 1:17 p.m., our door opened. Mrs. Cole walked in like she had a list. She closed the door, went straight to the desk, and started photographing our bank statements, my passport, Jason's student ID, our lease. She checked the bedroom, opened drawers, came back, straightened the chair, and left. 15 minutes total. We didn't talk, just stared. Jason said, That's her. It's her. We called the police. An officer arrived within an hour and watched the video twice. He asked if we knew the woman. We said she lived downstairs. He went to speak to her while we waited in the hall. We heard her say, This is a misunderstanding. She told him the landlord asked her to check if our faucet was leaking and gave her a key. The officer took the landlord's number and called him on speaker. The landlord denied it immediately. He said he never gives tenant keys to other tenants, and if there was a leak, he'd call maintenance. He sounded annoyed. The officer returned to us and explained the limits. She hadn't stolen any physical items, and unless we could show identity theft, there wasn't a custodial arrest to make. We could file a report, get a case number, and pursue a civil claim or a restraining order. He suggested freezing credit and monitoring accounts. He was polite and practical. It was not the satisfaction I wanted, but it made sense. The next morning, we met the landlord in person and broke the lease with a penalty fee. Jason ran the numbers on his phone and said paying now was cheaper than dealing with fraud later. We spent 2 weeks packing and forwarding mail. I set alerts on every bank and changed every password. I filed a police report and emailed the video to myself, to Jason, and to a new backup account. Mrs. Cole tried to hand us bread in the stairwell once. Jason told her, clear and calm, to please not speak to us. She said she'd been confused about the units and mentioned water stains again. We kept walking. On our last night there, I took one more photo of the desk, even though everything was in boxes. 2 weeks later, we moved to a different neighborhood and gave our address only to family, my agency, and Jason's HR. I still photographed the position of everything in our home before leaving. We only live in buildings with doormen and hallway cameras now. By the time I saw the scratches on the doorknob, I already knew something was off about my neighbor across the hall. My name's Emily, I'm 21, and 3 months ago I rented a room in a 2-story house near campus in Seattle. The owner rents to students, 4 rooms total, and we mostly keep to ourselves. Daryl, the neighbor across the hall, works nights at some warehouse and sleeps during the day. First 2 weeks, I barely saw him. I'd hear the front door around 7 in the morning, his steps on the stairs, his door closing. That was it. Then the weird stuff started. Every time I stepped out, bathroom, kitchen, grabbing a package, his door opened a few seconds later. He'd just stand there, like he'd been listening. He always said a short, "Hey," nothing rude, but he wouldn't break eye contact. The stare wasn't angry or anything, just too steady, like he was checking for something. I told myself it was timing, thin walls, whatever. But it kept happening. When I came home in the evening, I'd hear a door click shut upstairs right as I hit the 3rd step. That wasn't timing. That was him tracking who was where. Then, that morning with the scratches, I'd slept with my backpack on the chair, woke up late, reached for the knob, and saw those shallow lines like someone had tried to catch the edge of the lock with a tool and slipped. Not deep, not dramatic, just there. I stared at them for a full minute. My stomach did that drop. I didn't say anything to the landlord because I wasn't sure what I'd be accusing him of, but I started locking the internal chain I never used. A few days later, I forgot my phone in the car and ran down at 11. When I came back up, he was on the landing. His shift supposedly starts around 3, and he's usually out by then, so seeing him awake and just waiting threw me. He said he was just walking around, but it was raining and his hoodie was totally dry. I said, "Night," stepped around him, and he didn't move, just turned his head and tracked me to my door. Next morning at 7, I went to toss trash, thinking he had to be dead asleep after a night shift. He was by the bins, smoking, watching the front door like he was waiting for a delivery that never came. When he saw me, he nodded and kept staring at the door. That's when I set the chain every time, even if I was going to the bathroom for 2 minutes. I stopped wandering to the kitchen for late snacks. I'd wait for noise, water running, TV, and then move fast. At night I heard slow steps in the hallway, not passing by, stopping. A pause, a faint shift, then moving on. I told myself it was the other tenants, but I never heard their doors, just mine in my head, over and over. 2 weeks of that. I started texting my roommate group chat even though they never answered. Going to kitchen. Back in room. It felt dumb, but it made me feel like there was a record. One afternoon I tried to catch him and ask something normal. What warehouse? Do you need rides? Anything. But when I opened my door, he was already there, like he'd been standing with his ear to the wood. He smiled too fast and said, "What's up?" I lost my nerve and said, "Nothing," and he stepped closer like he expected more. I closed my door. That night I put a chair under the knob. It didn't reach well because the door opens outward into the hall, but it made me feel better anyway. Saturday night, around 2, I woke up to some sound in the hallway. The house creaks all the time, but this wasn't the house. It made me open my eyes. I stayed still and listened. After a minute, I saw a shadow under the door. feet blocking the light from the hall. Whoever it was stood close enough that the light line was cut in a clean block. It didn't shift, didn't tap, just stood there. I stopped breathing. The knob didn't turn, and I didn't hear anyone else moving. The chain was on. If I moved, the chain could jingle, and then the person would know I was awake. I stared at that thin strip of light and the dark shape in it. 30 seconds felt like 10 minutes. I counted slowly in my head and lost track twice. My heart was so loud I thought whoever was outside could hear it. 3 minutes, maybe 5. No way to be sure. Finally, the shadow slid away, and I heard quiet steps, heel-toe, going toward the far end of the hall. I didn't follow with my eyes. I kept staring at the light crack where it had been. After a second, I picked up my phone, turned the screen down so it wouldn't show, and typed a message to no one. I didn't send it. I just needed something in my hands that wasn't the blanket. I stayed awake until the birds started up and the light changed. When it was gray outside, I pushed the blanket off and stood up slow. My legs felt weird, like I'd been crouching, even though I'd been lying flat. I didn't touch the chain at first. I just looked at the knob, the plate, the scratches from before that suddenly looked fresh again, even though I knew they weren't. I put my ear to the door. Nothing in the hall. I unhooked the chain and immediately put it back, then caught myself and let it hang, and then put it back again. I don't know why. It just felt wrong to leave it off. After another minute of standing there like an idiot, I finally slid the chain open, then shut it again, testing how loud it was. It clinked more than I liked. I left it on. Then I stepped closer and looked at the lock from the inside. Everything looked normal. In the morning, I stepped into the hall to check the door from the outside and saw them. Fresh scratches around the keyhole. Someone had tried to wedge something in and scraped the metal. I took photos on my phone and went downstairs to the owner. I showed her the pictures and told her about the shadow under my door, and how Daryl always seemed to be there whenever I moved. She looked worried, but she said she couldn't evict anyone without real proof. Maybe the scratches were older. Maybe I'd missed them. She promised to talk to him. That was the only thing she could offer me right then. I went back to my room and set the chain. An hour later, I heard her knock on his door. Their voices carried down the hall. His got loud fast. He kept denying everything and said I was paranoid and targeting him. She told him she wanted everyone to feel safe. He talked over her and said, "She's obsessed with me." After a few minutes, I heard her walking away. She passed my door and said through it, "I spoke to him." After that, he didn't accidentally appear in the hallway anymore. When we crossed paths, he stared straight at me with this hard, angry look. I stopped trying to be polite and moved only when I heard the owner in the kitchen or water running downstairs. If I had to pass his door, I texted a friend first and wrote, "Call me if I don't respond in 2." I started putting my shoes on before opening the door so I could leave fast if I needed to. That week, I carried my keys in my hand even inside the house. Not as a weapon, just so I wouldn't have to dig with my back to the hall. I left a podcast playing low so it sounded like someone was on speaker. 2 nights later, I heard slow steps stop by my door and a light test on the knob. Then they moved on. The next 3 weeks were tight and strange. I barely left my room. I ordered food and met the delivery only if I could hear other tenants nearby. I skipped any class where attendance didn't matter. The hallway steps kept happening, and I stopped checking the peephole because I didn't want to see him there. The chair stayed under the knob even though the door opens outward, and it didn't make sense. It gave me something to do before bed. I kept the photos of the scratches and emailed them to myself. One afternoon, I came back from the library and heard movement upstairs. I turned the corner and saw the owner and a man carrying boxes out of Daryl's room. For a second, I thought I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. She said, "It's okay. before I asked anything. She told me he hadn't paid rent for 2 months, and she had finally started the eviction. He hadn't even argued. He'd already moved most of his stuff earlier that week in the middle of the night. They were clearing what was left. Some clothes, a broken lamp, random dishes. She apologized to me and said she regretted not taking me seriously right away. I said I understood and helped carry a light box down the stairs because standing there felt worse. I didn't see Daryl again. I'm still in the house. The new tenant in that room is a quiet Asian guy who studies computer science and keeps to himself. The scratches stay on my lock. I see them every time, and I think about that night and what he meant to do if it opened. The ceiling in my bedroom is covered in brown stains that smell like vomit and disinfectant. Last night, a plate-sized chunk of plaster fell right onto my bed, and I saw something dark between the beams. The building manager went upstairs to check the unit above mine and came back looking sick. He said there were 9 people sleeping on army cots. The windows were covered, and on the kitchen wall there was a schedule with confrontation session and water sobering written on it. When I asked what that meant, he said my neighbors Jennifer and Robert had started some kind of rehabilitation program. It's 3 in the morning, and I can hear screaming again. A woman begs, "Please, I want to call my mom." This has been going on for 2 months, but only tonight do I understand what's happening up there. My hands are shaking while I type because the police came today and left without doing anything. Everyone up there is an adult, and technically, they signed consent forms. I'm 31, and I live alone. 5 years in this apartment, quiet building, central part of the city. Jennifer and Robert Coleman moved in upstairs 3.5 years ago, regular couple around 40. He worked as a programmer. She said she was a nurse. For the first 2 years, I barely saw them. We nodded in the elevator. Once they slid a misdelivered package to my door and texted the number on the label they found. 8 months ago, I started noticing changes. At first, there were men's voices on weekends, then on weeknights too. The voices sounded dull, like people talking after they've been crying. Sometimes someone actually did cry, short and ugly. Then it would stop like a switch. I figured they were renting to students or helping out family. Then a junk company hauled out most of their furniture. Through my window, I saw metal bed frames going in, stacks of thin mattresses. I ran into Jennifer in the elevator and she said they'd started a new project to help people. No details. I didn't pry. None of my business, I told myself. I regret that now. 2 months ago, everything flipped. I started waking up at night to real screams. Not TV, not play fighting. The kind that knocks sleep out of you. More than once per night, something heavy hit the floor hard enough to shake my chandelier. At 3 a.m., always around 3, the same woman. "Please, I want to call my mom, please." In the mornings, there were group shouts, like several people yelling over one person. I couldn't make out the words, just an aggressive rhythm. Feet pounded, many of them, back and forth. A smell came through the vents. Sweat, urine, and something sharp and chemical. I made audio recordings on my phone, but I was scared to complain formally. On the 4th day, I met Robert at the mailboxes and asked if everything was okay. I kept my voice neutral. He gave me a tired smile and said, "We're helping people get back to life. The first weeks are always hard, but they thank us later." I nodded and said I hoped everyone was safe. He said, "Safer than on the street," and walked off holding a stack of printed schedules. By the end of that first week, brown halos spread on my bathroom ceiling. Then the bedroom. I scrubbed with enzyme cleaner. It didn't matter. I moved to the couch. I emailed the manager with dates and voice clips. He called me back fast, said he was going up. He came down pale and told me about the cots, the covered windows, the schedule with those words. He said Jennifer and Robert called it behavioral detox, no drugs involved. 2 officers did a welfare check, standing in my doorway like they were waiting for me to calm down, then went upstairs. They talked a while. When they came back, one of them said, "They're adults. It's messy, but it's legal. Keep a log. Use white noise." I asked what to do if someone was asking for her mother. He said, "It's common with withdrawal." Like that answered anything. Yesterday, the plaster fell. It exploded across my bed like chalk. When I looked up, I saw the dark seam between the joists and something stuffed there. Fabric, maybe. The manager sent maintenance and said he'd document it for the file. While the maintenance guy was scraping, something thudded above us and dust rained down. He flinched and said, "What the hell are they doing up there?" I didn't answer. I don't want enemies with people who control when I sleep. He patched the hole. 2 hours later, the brown came back through the paint. Tonight, a little after midnight, I heard chairs drag and boots running. I opened my door and stood at the stairwell. Someone was crying in that dry, exhausted way that sounds like the end of crying. I took one step up, then went back down. I'm not reckless. I called non-emergency again. They told me to keep documenting. I locked the deadbolt and stood under the broken spot, breathing through my mouth. Around 3, like a clock, the woman said it again. "Please, I want to call my mom." A man said, "Sit down." Again, a heavy fall shook my light. This morning I saw Robert by the mailboxes. I told him my plaster fell and asked quietly if the people upstairs had medical care. He smiled the same tired smile. We help people get back to life. The first weeks are always hard, but they thank us later. I didn't know what to answer. Last week I came back after a night shift and found the ceiling in my bedroom sagging and stained. By evening, a piece collapsed onto the bed. I called Mark, the manager. He came with a flashlight. Between the beams was a thick liquid. Mark said we needed to check upstairs right away. As he went up, a loud voice, "Stand up! Everyone stand up! Circle! Now!" Then stomping. He returned pale. 9 people on cots, windows covered, printed confrontation methods, buckets of vomit, metal rings in the floor, and cold water dousings causing the leak. I told him this was unsafe. He agreed and took photos of my ceiling and the hole, then went back to document upstairs. I started sleeping on the couch. At 3 a.m., the same drill, commands, a woman begging to call her mom, falls that shook my light. I uploaded recordings and sent them to Mark. He texted, "Document everything. I'm calling the city." By noon, he had a complaint number and said police were coming again. He met them on the stairs. Mark called building inspection and the police, but Jennifer produced signed consent forms for each participant. Mark asked a girl if she wanted to leave. Robert cut in fast. The first 2 weeks, they always want to run. It's part of the disease, an officer said. Let her answer. She stared at the floor and said she'd stay. The officer wrote notes and told them to reduce noise. He told me adults can legally consent to unpleasant treatment. Mark looked sick and said we'd let the inspector decide. Mark told me not to talk to the Colemans, but this morning Jennifer caught me by my car. She looked wrecked, dark circles, unwashed hair, hands shaking. "We're saving lives," she said. "Regular therapy doesn't work. They need a hard reset. We have 4 graduates clean for months. Parents cry." She grabbed my wrist. "You hear the screaming? It's normal. They break, then they thank us." I pulled free and said the water was wrecking my ceiling and someone could get hurt. She said, "Short-term pain," and walked away. Yesterday, the police came and left after an hour. Everyone upstairs is an adult. Documents are signed. Building inspection is scheduled for Wednesday. Mark texted me the time and, "Do not confront." "Do not go upstairs," but the Colemans started moving people already. Last night I watched through the peephole as 3 were led to a tinted minivan. No luggage, just thin hoodies and shoes with no laces. Robert guided them single file. Jennifer carried a plastic bin of papers and a mop handle. Upstairs there are still sounds, but quieter. Short bursts of chanting, then silence. Footsteps cross my bedroom toward the kitchen. The smell in the hall is faint bleach over sweat. I've covered my bed with plastic and moved the dresser. I leave my phone recording at night. When the woman starts begging again, I open the notes app and mark the time. Mark says, "Wait for Wednesday and keep logging." I keep the deadbolt set tight. I keep seeing that girl staring at the floor while Robert answered for her, and Jennifer's hand shaking on my wrist. I'm not trying to be a hero. I just want the leak to stop and for people not to be hurt. If they load everyone into vans before the inspection, I'll send what I have: audio, dates, videos of the stains, to anyone who will read it. For now, the apartment is mostly quiet, except for those short bursts above me, phone charged, and I'm waiting for Wednesday now. The knocking on my ceiling started at 3 in the morning, methodical and mean, even though I hadn't gotten out of bed. I was lying there with a book in the quiet, and suddenly from below someone started hammering into something heavy right under my bedroom. 3 sharp hits, a pause, 3 more. My downstairs neighbor Janice clearly decided I was throwing a party. This was the 3rd week after it all started. The first time she knocked, I was just sitting at my laptop answering email after work. I went down to her place then, tried to explain I wasn't stomping, that I was literally sitting. Janice opened the door with a broom in her hand and snapped that I stomped like an elephant. I froze because I had not moved from my chair. The door shut in my face, and from that evening the knocking became regular, no matter what I was doing. A month earlier, I'd rented a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of an old brick in Portland. 1920s, thick walls, radiators that look like museum pieces. Perfect for quiet, or so I thought. I'm an architect, 32, mostly at the office, not exactly the karaoke and drum set type. On day 2, Janice came up to introduce herself, a woman in her 50s with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said she lived under me and hoped for quiet because the last tenants were, quote, unbearable. I told her I'm quiet, I work late, she'd barely know I'm there. She nodded, but there was something in her look like she was already measuring me, and I decided not to dwell on it. First week was boxes and figuring out which outlet actually works. I took my shoes off at the door, set felt pads under the dining chairs. No issues. Then the knocking started. After that first night, it was constant. I'd come home, sit with dinner, and within 15 minutes the blows would start from below. I tried walking on my toes. I tried planning movements like I was in a library, slow, careful, deliberate. It didn't matter. She knocked when I lay on the couch and watched a show, when the kettle clicked off, once even when I flushed the toilet. I started dreading my own floorboards. I kept the TV barely above mute, talked on the phone in a whisper, which makes people ask if you're okay, which creates its own problem. I swapped to socks with thick soles. I learned exactly which boards squeaked and pretended the rest were lava. I went down again, because the only thing worse than this was letting it rot. I knocked at a normal hour, around 7. When she opened the door, the broom was propped nearby like a prop in a play. "Could we talk?" I said. I kept my voice low and even. I told her we could figure out a schedule, when I'm home, when I'm not, so she'd know. I offered to get a rug for the bedroom if that helped. She looked at me like I'd suggested we move the building. "I don't need a schedule," she said. "I need silence." I said I'm already quiet. She shut the door before I finished. At work, I drafted elevations and solved details, but my head kept drifting back to the apartment. That's not dramatic. That's just how sleep deprivation works. I started using the office gym at night to avoid going home right away. I bought a cheap sound meter because I wanted data. Sitting at my desk chair registered less than the fridge hum. I sent the numbers to the property manager, not as a complaint, just as, FYI, I'm trying to be mindful. He replied with something non-committal about old buildings and neighbor relations. I asked if there had been issues before. He said every building has personality. I didn't push, because I still thought this was fixable if I stayed reasonable. The knocks spread to daytime on weekends. Saturday morning, 9 a.m., I opened a drawer too fast, and below me, 3 hits, a pause, 3 hits. Sunday, I dropped a pen and got the same pattern. That pattern started to get under my skin, like she'd practiced it. I texted a friend. I think my neighbor's keeping score. He joked about earplugs and a white noise machine. I bought both. The white noise helped at night until the knocks cut through anyway. I sat there holding my breath, waiting for the next set like waiting for thunder. It's nothing, I told myself. It's a broom. It's drywall. It's not a threat. That was true, and it still didn't matter. 2 weeks in, I tried a different approach. I wrote a note, plain and simple. Hi Janice, Emily in 4D. I'm trying to be quiet. If there's a specific time that's worst for you, let me know and I'll plan around it. I slid it under her door. An hour later, there was a knock on mine. I opened it and found the note folded back with "Move" written across it in block letters. I took a photo of it and put it away. I didn't show it to anyone. I didn't want the chorus of "call a lawyer" or "just move," because moving costs money I didn't have for a place I'd chosen carefully. I told myself, people have bad days. Maybe she'd lost sleep before me. Maybe she has migraines. I gave her reasons because that's how I make sense of clients and city inspectors and all the random frictions of a project. It didn't make the knocks stop. By the 3rd week, my habits were getting strange. I'd stand in the hallway outside my door and listen before going in. I'd time the microwave to finish before 10. I turned off the dryer early and hung clothes so there'd be no spin cycle. I kept my keys in my pocket until I was inside with the door closed so they wouldn't jingle outside her door. It sounds excessive reading it back, but when someone under you hits the ceiling every time you breathe, you start reorganizing your life around not breathing. 3 weeks into this nightmare, something worse happened. I woke up one morning to water hitting my face. The bedroom ceiling was dripping, steady enough that my pillow was wet, and there was a puddle on the floor. I called the property manager, who showed up with a plumber. They went downstairs to Janice to check her lines. She let them in. I waited in the hall and listened to doors, pipe taps, low voices. The plumber came back and said everything in her bathroom and kitchen was dry. He said it was probably condensation from humidity in an old building. That didn't make sense. It hadn't rained, the windows were closed, and the stain on my ceiling was a hard circle like something above it had overflowed. I wasn't going to argue plumbing with a guy holding a wrench and 3 other calls to make. He told me to keep an eye on it. They left. I changed the sheets and slid the bed away from the spot because I didn't want to wake up like that again. The ceiling stayed dry for 2 days. On the 3rd, the ring darkened and then dried again, like someone turned a valve and shut it. The next morning there was a trash bag at my door. Not my trash. Tea bags, apple cores, greasy napkins, a used tissue on top. I carried it to the bin because I didn't want it sitting in the hall. The concierge said nobody had dropped anything off for me, which meant it came from someone in the building. 2 mornings later, another bag. Then again, Friday. Always early, before dawn. I started taking photos with timestamps and emailing the manager. He replied he'd check cameras and reminded me, again, that sound travels in old buildings and to be considerate. I told him this wasn't sound. He said he'd circle back. He never did. That same week, my doormat went missing. Then my welcome hook by the door was bent like someone had yanked on it. None of this was big by itself, but together it felt like a hand tapping my shoulder every time I unlocked the door. At work, my coworker pulled me aside by the printers. She asked if I was okay and if I needed help. I said I was fine. She said someone had called the main line and told the receptionist I had a drug problem. I laughed, then stopped when she didn't. I went to my boss's office. He asked me directly if there was anything he needed to know. I told him no, I don't even smoke. He believed me, I could tell. But he still said we were a client-facing firm, and even false rumors could hurt me. I told him someone in my building had a problem with me and was trying to make it mine. He said to document everything and keep him updated. I walked back to my desk and couldn't remember if I'd locked my door that morning. I started taking my laptop home every night. It came to a head on a cold November evening. I got home around 10, took the stairs like always, and halfway up I smelled smoke. Not radiator dust. Paper. I turned the corner and saw a stack of free newspapers smoldering in front of my door. Flame curled the edges. It licked the bottom of the door, and the paint started to blister. I yelled for help, grabbed the fire extinguisher from the bracket, pulled the pin, and flooded the pile until it died. Smoke rolled down the hall, and the alarm started screaming. People opened doors. Someone coughed and asked if we should evacuate. I kept spraying until the nozzle sputtered. Firefighters arrived and took over, then the police. I gave my statement with my hands shaking. A neighbor from the second floor told the cops he'd seen Janice going up with a tote bag about 20 minutes before I got home. 2 officers went down to her unit. She opened in a nightgown, hair messy, blinking like she'd been woken. She said she'd been asleep. They asked to come in. She let them. On her table was a lighter and a couple of the same papers. One cop asked her straight why she'd done it. Janice started crying and yelling that I'd driven her crazy with constant noise, that she hadn't slept in months, that she just wanted to scare me so I'd move out. They cuffed her. The super mopped foam off the floor. The bottom of my door was black and bubbled. The hallway smelled like burnt paint. I stood there in the smoke and knew I couldn't live there anymore. Later, after reports and insurance calls and the smell that got into my coat, I kept replaying every choice and what it added up to. I did the normal things, talked, documented, stayed calm, asked for help, and it still ended with fire at my door. People say to be neighborly. I was. It didn't matter. I broke my lease, paid the fee, and left the furniture I couldn't scrub the smell out of, because I wanted a place where closing the door meant I was safe. I moved to Austin in February for a new startup job and rented a 1-bedroom on the second floor of a 3-story house near downtown. The company was small, 6 engineers on Slack, 2 founders, a product manager who lived in Seattle. So I worked remote, set up my monitors, and tried to make a routine. The first week was quiet. I walked to a taco place at lunch, hit the gym in the evening, and let the TV run while I pushed code. On day 3, I ran into my upstairs neighbor on the stairs. She stuck out a hand and said, "Lindsay Shaw, project manager." I'm in and out a lot, mid to late 30s, neat blazer, laptop bag. Her energy was friendly without being intrusive. We swapped numbers in case of packages or leaks. That night I texted her mine with a thumbs up. Everything felt normal. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound that didn't fit. At first, I thought it was a cat. Then it kept going. A baby crying, thin at first, then louder, almost a full-on scream. It went 15 minutes, maybe a touch longer, then stopped like someone flipped a switch. The house settled back to the usual hum. I lay there thinking about what Lindsay had said. She lived alone. She'd been clear about it in that breezy way people are when they're proud of the independence. The next day was a sprint review. I tried to forget it. That night, the same thing. Not at 2 exactly, closer to 1:10. Crying again, this time in waves. It paused a few minutes, started again, then died out. I watched the clock on my microwave because I couldn't not watch it. The day after that, it hit after midnight. I got up and stood in my kitchen, listening for pipes or HVAC or anything that would excuse the noise as building sounds, which is the label you put on whatever you don't want to think about. By day 4, I ran into Lindsay in the hall. She looked put together, heels, coat over her arm, car keys in hand. I said something casual like, "Hey, heads up, I've been hearing some loud late-night audio. Might be traveling through the vents?" She laughed, a little too quickly but not defensive. "Oh, yeah. I fall asleep to movies sometimes. Those family dramas can get intense. I'll wear headphones." She apologized, asked if it kept me up, and promised to turn it down. That night, there was nothing. Quiet. I slept hard and told myself it was solved. 3 days later, the crying came back. I woke to it sharp, like it had been threaded into my dream. Same age range, baby or tiny toddler. But this time, there was another sound. A woman's voice, low and soothing, close to the mic if it was a recording. It wasn't the tinny, mixed-down sound of a TV through a wall. It felt near, like above my bed near. "Shh, shh," she murmured. The child hiccuped between sobs. The hair on my arm stood up. I don't scare easy. I'm a boring IT guy who thinks logs, patterns, simple answers. But I lowered the TV volume and still heard it, which meant it wasn't the TV. Over the next 2 weeks, I barely saw Lindsay. When I did, she looked wrecked. Dark circles, chapped lips, a kind of slow blink that said she was running on fumes. Once on the stairs, she missed a step and did that little skip people do to catch themselves. "Long week?" I said. "Airports," she said, and smiled without showing teeth. Later that night, I heard quick footsteps overhead. Then something heavy hit the floor, and a short, sharp cry bloomed and cut off. Not a long wail, a cry of pain. Then silence dense enough that even the fridge seemed to hold its breath. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand. I thought about going upstairs. I also thought about how insane it would be to pound on a neighbor's door at 11 p.m., half-informed and keyed up, and accuse them of what, exactly? I sat back down and opened a browser tab to look up how to report a welfare concern without blowing up your life. I closed it again. If there was no child, the call would follow me. If there was a child, and I did nothing, I'd have to live with that too. I told myself I'd watch a few more days. Not forever. Just enough to be sure I wasn't chasing phantom echoes. 2 afternoons later, I heard wheels on the stairs and peeked out. Lindsay was dragging a carry-on down. She didn't see me. She took it to her car and left. That night, nothing. The next night, nothing. I tried to get comfortable with that, like the story had ended in a boring way, and I could be mad about lost sleep and move on. Then the crying came back after 12:30. The same cadence. The same woman's voice, closer than ever. I got my phone and started a voice memo. 1/2 minute of air. When the crying stopped, so did the voice. A few nights later, close to 3 a.m., I came back from a run and slowed at the curb. The house was quiet, street empty. Lindsay's car was idling under the streetlight. In the glow, I saw her come down the steps carrying a large duffel bag. She moved fast and kept scanning the street. She lifted the bag with both hands and set it into the trunk, then reached down and adjusted her grip. The bag looked heavy. She carried it with both hands. I called the Child Protection Hotline the next morning and made an anonymous report. I described the late-night crying, the pauses, the soothing voice that didn't sound like a TV, and the 3 a.m. departure with the heavy duffel in her trunk. I gave Lindsay's name, the house layout, my floor, her floor, and that she told me she lived alone. I said I wasn't certain there was a child, and I didn't want to blow up an innocent person's life. But something was wrong. The woman on the line was calm. She said they'd passed the information to the appropriate department and that an investigator might reach out. She gave me a case number and told me to call back if anything escalated. 2 days later, a social worker and a uniformed cop knocked on my door in the afternoon. They were professional, not dramatic. They asked about dates, times, how the crying sounded, whether I'd ever seen a child, whether Lindsay had visitors. I told them everything. The footsteps, the thud, the single cry of pain, the night I saw her load the bag. I played them my useless 30 seconds of silence from the voice memo because it felt important to try. They thanked me, said they'd talk to other tenants and attempt contact upstairs, and left without telling me much else. For over a week, the ceiling stayed quiet. No footsteps, no water, no TV, nothing. Her parking spot was empty most nights. I tried to focus on work and even convinced myself I had overreacted. Then around 10 p.m. one Thursday, I heard shoes cross above my kitchen and stop over my hallway. A drawer slid. Water ran. She was back. I lay down and waited. Not because I wanted proof, but because I needed to know if the problem was still the problem. Near midnight, the crying started again, but it was wrong now. Muffled, like it was farther from the floor or wrapped in something thick. The woman's voice was there too, lower, more careful. I stared at the smoke detector on my ceiling and counted until it stopped. I never found out what the authorities discovered. Maybe they never got inside. Maybe they did and decided there was nothing urgent. Lindsay kept living upstairs like the building was only a place to sleep between flights. When I passed her in the hallway, she gave me a nod that wasn't friendly or angry, just cold and polite, like a cashier saying next. No more small talk about travel or packages. She'd unlock her door with the same smooth motion every time and close it without a sound. The crying continued for another month, not nightly, but often enough that I kept my phone nearby with the Notes app open like that would help. Sometimes it would flare and die inside 2 minutes. Sometimes it would go longer, then cut out mid-sob like a hand had covered it. I logged dates on a sticky note and then ripped it up because I hated having a record of something I couldn't stop. Then 1 week, nothing. A second week, still nothing. The house settled into its old routine. I signed a new lease in a different neighborhood 3 months later and hired movers because I didn't want any more late-night runs up and down those stairs. I still wake at night and listen to the silence, wondering if I should have done more. Not knowing is the worst. What was happening? Was there a child? Was I too careful? I'll probably never know for sure. So, when I moved into my townhouse in Austin about 8 months ago, I thought I'd finally found a quiet place to work from home. The complex is standard. 2 floors, gray facades, identical doors with small apartment numbers. I'm in Unit 21 on the first floor. Above me in 23 lives a woman, maybe 30. I'd seen her a couple times in the elevator. We'd nod and keep moving. Light hair in a ponytail. Always in gym clothes like she was headed to or from a workout. I didn't know her name. For the first few months, I barely thought about my neighbors. I kept to myself. Remote job. Quiet life. One Wednesday evening, I was watching a movie when I heard a key in my lock. The handle turned, but the door didn't open. The deadbolt was thrown. Someone outside cursed under their breath. I got up, looked through the peephole, and saw the upstairs neighbor standing there with a key in her hand, staring straight at the number on my door. I opened it a crack with the chain still on. She jumped back and apologized fast, said she got confused about which floor she was on. Same doors, same layout, reached for the handle out of habit. I said it was fine. She nodded, almost too quickly, and headed upstairs. It was weird, but people do dumb automatic stuff when they're tired. I shut the door and went back to the couch. But it stuck with me that I'd seen her studying the number before she even tried the key. Not just a thoughtless reach. She looked, then she tried. I told myself I was overthinking it. Movie back on, volume low, deadbolt definitely locked. A week later, it happened again. Around 10 at night, I was working on my laptop in the living room when the key sound came back. This time the handle worked longer, like whoever was out there didn't understand why it wouldn't give. I stood, walked to the door, looked through the peephole. Same neighbor. I pulled the door open quickly, and she stepped back, embarrassment already on her face. "I'm so sorry," she said. Same story about floors and routine and long day. I said, "How does your key even fit my lock?" She shrugged, said she had no idea. Maybe the complex used similar locks. She'd email management right away. I said, "Yeah, they should check it out." Because that's what a normal person says when someone tries to open their front door with a key. She nodded and left. I relocked everything and stood there a second, listening to my heartbeat. It sounded like a lie, but I didn't have proof. I set my laptop on the counter and made a note to follow up with the office if I saw her again. The next few days were quiet. I started noticing her walking around upstairs at odd times, like 3 in the morning. Footsteps back and forth. Not heavy, just frequent. I told myself some people don't sleep well. Then one night, actually 3 a.m. on Saturday, I woke up to a quiet metallic sound. Not pipes, not the fridge cycling. I lay there trying to place it, and then it clicked. Someone was working on my lock. I got up, kept my steps light, and went to the door. Through the peephole, I saw her. She was inserting something into the keyhole, pulling it out, trying again. No hesitation, like this wasn't a mistake or a confused moment at the wrong door. It was deliberate, measured. I reached over and flipped the hallway light on loud, the switch snapping against the wall. The sound stopped immediately. I checked again. Nobody there. The hallway was empty. No feet on the stairs, no apartment doors closing, just empty. At 8, when the hardware store opened, I drove straight over. I bought a chain lock that mounts high and a pack of longer screws for the strike plate. Back home, I drilled into the frame, measuring twice. The chain sat high enough that even if someone got clever with the main deadbolt, the door would stop an inch open. I reinforced the existing plates too, a quick, careful job. It wasn't paranoia. It was the easiest cheap improvement I could do on a Saturday morning. I tested it a few times with my shoulder, just to feel that catch. It held. After that, I made coffee and sat at the table facing the door instead of the window. I kept hearing the click from the night before, even though the room was quiet. Work emails piled up, but my focus didn't come back. Every small noise in the hallway made me pause. By afternoon, I was replaying everything she'd said. The confusion about floors, the rough day, the idea that her key could fit my lock. None of it made sense. The locks aren't universal. If anything, the first time could be chalked up to a dumb mistake. The second time didn't feel like a mistake. The third time, with the tool, definitely wasn't. I considered going upstairs to talk, then shut that down. No point cornering a neighbor and escalating, especially if I was missing something that made me look like the jerk. If management was going to do anything, they'd need facts, not a he said, she said. I pulled up the email portal and typed a short note requesting a lock rekey for Unit 21 and asking if anyone else had reported key issues. I didn't send it. I stared at it a long time, then saved it as a draft and closed my laptop. Maybe I'm wrong and this is fixable with an office memo and a locksmith, but the pattern feels off. People don't keep confusing floors at 3 a.m. with a tool in their hand. And I can't stop asking the only question that matters. What does she want from my apartment, and why does she keep trying to get in? 2 days later, I found a note under my door. Feminine handwriting. Neat. Kevin, I'm really embarrassed about the past few weeks. I understand how it looks. Could we talk? I can explain everything. Apartment 23 inches. How did she know my name? I'd never introduced myself. Maybe from the mailbox. I put the note in a drawer and left it there. I didn't respond. The next day, another note. I really want to explain. It's important. No details, just the same steady tone, like a coworker asking for a meeting. I worried now and drafted an email to the building manager, then deleted it. I even pulled up the non-emergency police number and stared at it. I didn't want to report without more than weird attempts and paper slips. The notes kept coming, one every couple of days. Always polite but insistent. Sometimes late at night footsteps stopped by my door. I'd check the peephole and see nothing. She was standing just out of view. The chain lock made me feel better, but it didn't fix the feeling that something was off. I thought about moving, but I'd just signed a year lease and breaking it would cost money I didn't have set aside. I told a friend over the phone and kept it light. Weird neighbor stuff. He said, document it. So I took photos of each note with timestamps and saved them to the cloud. For a few days there were no notes. Then another appeared, same handwriting. I'm not trying to scare you. I slid it into the same drawer and locked the deadbolt again. About a week after the notes started, I saw a notice on the lobby board. Townhouse for sale, Unit 21. My address. For a second I thought it was a mistake or some scam. I called my landlord while I was still standing in front of it. He picked up. I asked why my place was listed. He reminded me I'd signed a rent-to-own agreement and said he'd decided to sell now. I had read the contract, but I'd treated the option like a someday thing. I hadn't planned to buy, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Stability, control, and new locks I could choose myself. I slept on it and called him the next day to say I'd move forward. Paperwork took over. Inspections, signatures, money moving from one account to another. I kept my head down and stuck to routines. I added one small thing. I started announcing myself before I opened the door, even in the daytime, just so no one would be right there. The neighbor didn't try the door again after that. No more notes. Maybe she found out I was buying. Maybe the chain finally did its job as a message. 6 weeks later, I closed. A locksmith came that afternoon and swapped both cylinders, reinforced the strike plates, and gave me new keys in a little envelope. He didn't ask why. I didn't offer it. I still hear footsteps upstairs at odd hours. She still lives there as far as I know. We pass in the parking lot or lobby sometimes. She acts normal. Quiet hello, eyes on her phone, like none of it ever happened. I don't bring it up. I still check the chain before bed even though it's been months. The notes are in a folder in my desk, just in case. I never found out what she wanted or why she kept trying to get into my apartment, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. Not today. I moved into this apartment complex in Portland 10 months ago. My neighbor across the hall, Kevin, introduced himself the first week. He seemed normal enough, late 30s maybe, clean enough car, talked a little too confidently about Eastern techniques and energy healing. I told him I was a programmer and sit at a computer all day. When I mentioned my neck being a mess, he jumped on it. "I'll do a session for you, totally free, neighbor to neighbor." I smiled, said thanks, and changed the subject. He brought it up again in the elevator, then again by the mailboxes. It was always casual but too persistent, like he had a script he was determined to finish. 2 months in, I learned his schedule without trying. He left around 10, came back late afternoon, sometimes in scrubs, sometimes in gym clothes. He'd time his hellos. If I got home at 6:30, he'd open his door at 6:31. "How's your neck? You're carrying in your traps," he'd say, pinching the air like he could see through my hoodie. I kept it polite and short. I work alone and I live alone. My rules are boring and simple for a reason. 3 months ago, I had a migraine that wiped me out. Screens were a knife. My vision had that static. I wasn't leaving the couch. That evening, Kevin knocked with a package that belonged to me but was delivered to him. He saw my face and said, "Migraine?" I nodded and tried to keep the door mostly closed. He told me he could help. "Pressure points. 15 minutes, it will break." I swear I said no. Then he said, "I'll set up right here, no charge, just helping." And I was too tired to argue. I was also scared of the night becoming worse. I agreed, with the condition that it was quick and only my neck. He came back 5 minutes later with a folded massage table and a small bag. It took him 10 seconds to set up like he'd done this in apartments 100 times. He pulled a bottle from the bag. "Special blend, essential oils with herbs. Triples the effectiveness," he said it like he could trademark the sentence. The smell hit fast, lavender and mint, something bitter underneath. It was strong enough that I cracked a window. He asked me to lie face down and I did, still in leggings and a sweatshirt, and I kept repeating, "Just neck and shoulders." At first, it was exactly that. He found the tight spot at the base of my skull and worked it in short, precise presses. He knew anatomy, knew when to ease off and when to hold. My headache started to lift, and I let myself relax just a little. 7 minutes in, his hands drifted to my shoulder blades, then the middle of my back. He said, "The chain's all connected," which I know can be true, but I hadn't asked for anything below my neck. I stiffened and said I felt better and we could stop. He went still. "Of course," he said, almost cheerful, and stepped back. He packed fast. At the door, he handed me the oil. "Use it daily. Temples, neck, a drop on the tongue if you're really bad. Come by anytime." I said thanks and put the bottle under the sink. After that, he was around more, not in a dramatic way, just available. He'd knock with excuses, a flyer mixed in with my mail, a question about the building's Wi-Fi, an invite for coffee he just brewed, and always the same line threaded through. "How's your neck? You look tight again. I can help." I stopped opening the door all the way. I kept it on the chain and stayed polite but final. Within 2 weeks, notes started sliding under my door. Nice stationery, neat handwriting. "Thinking about our session. You were very receptive to healing. Let's repeat it. Another. I noticed you rubbing your temple. Please let me assist." He'd underline assist. One evening, there was a new bottle of oil outside my door with a card. "Specially for you. Massage your temples before bed." I put it in a plastic bag and didn't bring it inside. I told my coworker, Amelia, the next morning. We were on a quick break room coffee, and I said it like I was trying to laugh it off but couldn't. She frowned in a way that made me feel less crazy. What's his name? I said Kevin. Kevin. Harris? Massage therapist? I blinked. Yeah. She didn't smile. She pulled out her phone and said she was calling her friend Laura, who worked at a women's support center. Laura picked up on speaker. Amelia gave her the basics. Laura didn't jump to conclusions, just asked the right questions. Did he ever touch you without consent? No, I stopped it. Any gifts beyond the oil? Just notes and coffee offers. Did he mention clients by name? Number. Amelia said, he keeps pushing massages. And his oil. Laura went quiet for a second and then said, I know him. She told us 2 women had contacted their center last year. Both met Kevin through apartment buildings and a community Facebook group. He messaged first about stress relief and free neighbor sessions. He brought his own oil. He started professionally, then drifted. One woman described feeling foggy during and after, like she'd had 2 glasses of wine on an empty stomach even though she hadn't had any alcohol. The other said she felt fine during, but realized later she'd frozen because she didn't want to make it awkward in her own living room. Both told similar stories. He offered free sessions, used his special oil, started professionally, but then his hands ended up where they shouldn't be. One woman woke up during a session and found him massaging her thighs under the towel, though she came for back pain. When she protested, he said, "It's a holistic approach. All body parts are connected." Like a script he couldn't stop reading. Laura said police couldn't prove anything. Nothing left marks, nothing obvious. And he'd flip it back to professional techniques and acupressure points. His license was revoked, but he kept working privately. I went home with all of that in my head and made a decision. I stopped answering the door when he knocked. If I saw him in the hallway, I looked down and kept walking. No drama, just distance. The notes kept coming, now almost daily. At first, they were the same polite tone. Then they changed, little by little. I felt a connection between us. You trusted me. Why are you avoiding me? Another. You don't understand what you're rejecting. I can give you more than just massage. He started referencing details from our apartment hallway, like what time he thought I usually came home. It wasn't a threat on paper, but it felt like one in practice. I saved everything. I told myself that if I had to talk to someone official, I'd bring a file. 3 times in 1 week, I found bottles of oil at my doorstep. No knocking, just there when I opened the door. One had a note. For your body. It remembers my hands. I wore gloves from under my sink, put the bottles in a trash bag, and took them to the dumpster behind the building. I started using the peephole for every sound. I kept the chain on even during daylight. I set a rule for myself. No opening the door unless I had initiated the contact. It sounds small, but rules help me think when I'm scared. Last week I ran into a neighbor I'd only seen in passing, Grace, from upstairs. She looked at me for a second like she was deciding something, then asked, "Is Kevin bothering you too?" I didn't say yes immediately, but my face must have answered. She exhaled and nodded. He stalked my roommate 6 months ago until she moved out. Grace said the roommate tried everything, firm nose, ignoring him, recording interactions on her phone. He backed off for 2 weeks and then escalated with gifts and notes. It was the same pattern. Grace showed me a Facebook group where women from the area share warnings. The group wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Screenshots, dates, what worked, what didn't. There were 5 posts about Kevin over the last 2 years, all with similar stories. One wrote, "He uses the oil to later say you agreed to a full session. Don't let him in." Another said he'd sit in common areas at night like he was waiting for someone specific. Reading it made me feel less alone and more angry at the same time. It also made me careful in a new way, because this wasn't random. It was a pattern he repeated. Yesterday I came home at 10 after work and found him sitting on the floor by my door. His massage table and bag were next to him like he was clocked in. He stood when he saw me and smiled. Finally. I've been waiting 2 hours. I know you're avoiding me, but I can't stop thinking about that session. Your body responded so well. Please, let's do it again. Just once I didn't answer. I turned my body sideways and moved toward my lock. My hands shook, pulling out the keys. I wasn't performing strength. I was trying to get inside without making this worse. He stepped closer. Too close. I could smell that oil on his clothes. Lavender and that same bitter note. He lowered his voice like we were sharing a secret. I made a new blend, specially for you. Stronger. It'll unlock what you're keeping inside. I got the door open, stepped in fast, and slammed it shut on his words. Through the door, I heard him say, "I'll be waiting. You'll come back." They all come back. I stood with my back to the door for a minute, counting slowly, then slid the chain and checked the knob twice. This morning, I opened the door to leave for work and saw not one bottle, but a whole box. 6 bottles, all labeled in that neat handwriting. For neck, for back, for relaxation, for sleep, for trust, for us. I took the box, held it away from my clothes, and walked straight to the building manager's office. I planned to show him the notes, the bottles, Grace's messages, the group screenshots, everything. The door was locked. The lights were off. He wasn't there. Back in February 2021, me and my wife Sarah bought this house from an elderly lady named Mrs. Harrison. Small single-story cottage in the suburbs outside Philly, with a porch and an old oak in the yard. The sale moved fast. She was going into assisted living, and there were no issues. During the walkthrough, she showed us the photos on the mantle and talked about her son, David, who grew up here. Kid on a bike, teenager in a graduation gown, middle-aged with a beard. She said he lived in Boston now, but visited sometimes. We moved in 3 weeks later, cheerful, unpacking, arguing in a good way about where the desk should go. I worked from home freelance. Sarah taught at a middle school. We were happy. The first 2 weeks were perfect. The first time I saw him was 2 weeks after we moved in. Early Saturday, I stepped onto the porch with coffee, and there was a man at our living room window with his palm cupped to the glass, peering in. Mid-40s, beard, denim jacket. I said, "Hey, can I help you?" He turned, gave this sorry-looking smile. Said his name was David Harrison, Mrs. Harrison's son. He told me this was his house, that he grew up here, and he was driving by and couldn't resist looking. I said I understood, but this was our place now, and a heads up would be better next time. David nodded, apologized, and backed off the porch. "Won't happen again," he said. He left on foot. I told Sarah right away. We chalked it up to nostalgia. He'd probably had a rough goodbye with the place. It made sense. A week later, I saw him again. This time he was at the back bedroom window, standing in the narrow space by the shrubs. I went around to him. He didn't smile. He said he'd left some of his things in the basement and needed to get them. I told him the basement was empty when we moved in. He frowned. Not confused. Annoyed. "You're mistaken," he said, and walked off down the side yard without another word. I stood there a minute with that weird feeling you get when someone acts like you've stolen something they can't name. From there, it got regular. Once a week, then twice. I'd see him circling the house, pausing under the kitchen window, craning up at the vents like he was listening. Sometimes he tugged the door handles, quick little checks, as if I wouldn't notice. I noticed. We called the police the first time we caught him trying to open the back door with a key. I watched him slide the key in and rattle it like he was surprised it didn't work. The officer who showed up was calm, the practiced kind. He asked for David's ID. David kept repeating, "It's my house. I have a right to be here." The cop told him it wasn't his house anymore, and if he came back it would be trespassing. David stared at me instead of the officer, flat, like I was a spot on a wall, then nodded and left. We changed the locks that afternoon. I scheduled a locksmith the second the cruiser pulled away. Logical step, right? Different brand, different keys. I put the old keys in a bag on a hook in the garage, though I don't know why I kept them. He came back the next week anyway. I saw him around noon from my office window. He didn't try the doors this time, just walked the perimeter slow, hands in his jacket pockets, glanced up into the gutters, then at the oak like he was mapping something in his head. I stayed inside and called non-emergency. They said to keep documenting and to call 911 if he tried entry again. One evening, Sarah came home before me and called as soon as she got through the door. "Did you move the chair?" she asked. I told her no. She said the armchair in the living room was at the other window, and the little side table was shifted so the lamp cable stretched. She was sure it hadn't been like that when she left that morning, and so was I. All the doors and windows were locked. She double-checked with me on speaker, room by room. Nothing else seemed off, but it didn't matter. We both knew how the furniture had moved. I told her to wait on the porch until I got home. She did. Next morning I opened the entry closet to grab my jacket and saw a men's denim jacket hanging on the end of the rod. That closet had only our coats and a box of gloves. I pulled the jacket out like it might bite. Medium, worn elbows, a faint smell of old cigarettes that wasn't ours. In the pocket, a business card. David Harrison. No number. Just the name in a serif font and a small raised border. I didn't show Sarah the card right away. I put the jacket back, shut the closet, then reopened it to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Still there. I showed her then. We didn't argue about calling. She dialed before I could. The same officer came with a detective this time. We told them about the furniture and the jacket and the card. The detective looked at the door frames, at the windows, at the basement bulkhead, all the usual points. He asked if we might have left a door unlocked. We said no. He said, "It happens, not unkindly." I told him we'd change the locks. He nodded. He asked if we had a spare key hidden outside. We didn't. He checked the hinge pins, the strike plates. He asked about keys Mrs. Harrison might still have. We said the listing agent collected them all at closing. The detective listened, then asked if David had ever had a key back in the day that wasn't accounted for. I said I had no way of knowing that. He looked at the card again, handed it back and said, "My advice? Install cameras, inside and out. Document everything we did that the next day, 3 inside, 2 outside." A week after we set up the cameras, we drove to Sarah's parents for the weekend. We got back Sunday evening. I put the key in, and the lock turned like butter, no catch, like someone had just oiled it. Inside, the air felt, used isn't the right word, but lived in. There was a dirty mug on the kitchen table, plates in the sink, not ours. In the bedroom, the comforter was creased, and the pillows were dented in a way that didn't match us. On Sarah's nightstand lay a folded note. "Sorry for the trouble." Just wanted to be home. Sarah started crying right there, hands to her mouth like she was holding the sounds in. I called the police. While we waited, I checked every room, not touching more than I had to. Drawers slightly open. Our closet door off by an inch. TV remote on the couch, angled toward the screen. It felt like walking through a version of our place where we didn't exist. The officers came with the detective from before. He asked if anything was missing. I said I couldn't even tell yet. He said we should pull the camera footage. I opened the app and scrubbed back. David walked in Friday night using a key, not forcing anything. He moved like he belonged. He cooked eggs in our pan, ate with his sleeves pushed up, watched a game, laughed at something on his phone. He slept in our bed, on Sarah's side first, then rolled to mine. He talked to himself. The audio caught him saying, "My room," standing in our bedroom doorway, and in the kitchen. Mom kept the sugar right here, while he opened the wrong cabinet twice. We watched him go through our drawers. He picked up Sarah's scarf, held it to his face, and then folded it back neat. He took framed photos off the bookcase and stared at them too long, like he was trying to place who we were. Every so often he'd pause, listen, then keep going. He stayed 2 full days. Left Saturday morning for an hour, came back with a paper bag and a new bottle of dish soap. On the video, he talked about the backyard like he was narrating a tour. Dad planted that. We don't have records of a dad. It didn't matter. The detective radioed something in and said they were going to pick him up. He told us to leave the house as is for now, then changed his mind and said lock up tight, don't touch the note. He asked how he got past the new locks. I said I didn't know. An hour later, he called with the answer. David had never left for Boston. He'd been living at a motel off the highway, 20 minutes away. Before the sale, he made duplicates of the originals. After we changed the locks, he hired a locksmith, pretended to be me, and got fresh keys. It happens more than you think, the detective said. He asked if we wanted a patrol to drive by that night. I said yes. We got a restraining order the next week, 50 meters from the property. Paper in hand felt good for maybe a day. We couldn't relax there. Every time we pulled into the driveway, I scanned the windows first. Sarah stopped staying home alone. She used personal days to avoid being in the house without me. Nights turned into checks. Front door, back door, windows, basement, then again. The cameras would ping a shadow from a passing car, and we'd both sit up. That's nothing, I'd say, and then get up anyway. I started seeing him and other men, beards at the grocery store, a denim jacket across the street. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I just couldn't tell what was normal anymore. We kept a log for the detective like he asked. No violations in the first month. Then a car idled too long near the curb one night but didn't cross the line, so it was nothing, legally. Sarah asked if we should sell. I said we should wait for spring, better market. We made it 6 months. That was our limit. We listed under what we paid, took the first solid offer because sleeping started to feel like a luxury. At closing, I told the buyers everything. I opened the laptop and showed them clips. The couple watched without flinching. The guy said, "We'll upgrade the system and we'll be fine." The woman asked about the restraining order dates. They seemed calm. I wanted that calm so badly I could taste it. 2 years passed. Sometimes I cut through that part of town to save time. I slow down by the house without meaning to. Fresh paint now, lighter color, new fence, porch swing. I tell myself to keep driving, but I still look at the windows, just once, to make sure there isn't a shape there. I always look for the beard and the denim jacket. I keep thinking he's still around that block somewhere, watching the house, waiting for his chance to walk back in. Last summer, I moved to Seattle and rented a house near Green Lake. I took the job at the public library downtown, circulation desk most days, kids programs twice a month. It felt like a good reset. My neighbor to the right was Dr. Carol Wyndham, a veterinarian with a small clinic about 20 minutes away. Mid-40s, trim, nice smile, the kind of person who remembers your schedule and asks about it later. We clicked fast. I love cats, but couldn't get one because of the rental rules. She teased me about borrowing a clinic cat on weekends. She'd tell these funny, gentle stories about anxious terriers and stubborn tabbies, then slip in useful advice. Hydration fountains, litter box placement, that kind of thing. She seemed steady, professional, safe. In August, I started noticing missing cat posters on poles around our blocks. 1, then 2, then 5 by the end of the month. Different colors, all indoor, outdoor, all last seen within a few blocks. I took photos on my phone like I could help remember. One evening we were both wrestling recycling out to the curb, and I said the posters were starting to worry me. Carol did a thoughtful frown. Could be coyotes, she said. We're close to green space, or someone trapping for labs. Still happens, sadly. She offered to help organize a little neighborhood sweep and told me to push owners to post more flyers, next door posts, the whole thing. Don't bother with shelters, she added, pouring us each a glass of wine in my backyard. They're overwhelmed. Cats get mislabeled, get sick. It's chaos. Better to search ourselves. That sounded off to me, coming from a vet, but I told myself she knew the system better than I did. Over the next couple weeks, we kept talking about it. I'd bring up a poster I'd seen. She'd nod like she'd already logged it. She kept repeating that same shelter advice. I chalked it up to her seeing too much behind the scenes. In early September, another flyer appeared. An orange cat named Marvin from the next street over. Middle-aged woman, red eyes, carrying a stack of copies, knocked door to door. I took a photo and promised I'd keep an eye out during my walk to the bus. Carol stepped over later while I watered the tomato pots, asked if I'd heard about the orange one. I said yes, Marvin. She said she might have seen a similar cat near the highway shoulder. Could have been hit, hard to tell from the distance. It was the way she said it, flat, like a weather report. The owner came by again the next day, crying. I gave her Carol's clinic card, thinking, I don't know, maybe the clinic gets strays turned in sometimes, even if Carol said shelters were useless. The mood on the street changed after Marvin. People started locking gates, calling it dusk more loudly than usual. I kept repeating Carol's coyote theory when people asked because it was simple, and simple felt safer. A week later, taking out the trash after dark, I passed Carol's bins at the curb. Her recycling lid was propped open by a wine box. The black garbage bin had its lid flipped back. I don't know why I looked. Habit, maybe. Inside, right at the top, was a blue collar with a tiny silver bell. My hand moved before my brain did. I picked it up. The bell felt heavy for how small it was. The collar was frayed at the buckle hole. I knew it. It was in Marvin's photo. I put it in my hoodie pocket, closed the lid, and walked fast back to my kitchen. Cold shot down my arms to my fingers. I locked the back door. Then I unlocked it, like I didn't want to look paranoid, then locked it again. I made tea, didn't drink it. I kept telling myself, maybe she found the collar on the sidewalk and tossed it. Maybe someone else dumped trash in her bin. But why not call the number on the poster? Why not leave it on the owner's porch? I decided to wait, not confront. I'm not reckless, and I'm not stupid. People do dumb confrontations in stories. In real life, you observe, and you write things down. The next morning, I put the collar in a paperback at work. Between pages, I knew I wouldn't lend out. I started keeping a little note in my phone with dates and what Carol said. I made sure to sound normal with her. Asked about a senior cat she told me about. Listened to a story about a labradoodle that ate socks. She was exactly the same. And that was unsettling. If she noticed anything off about me, she didn't show it. 2 days later, I tried something small. I mentioned a tabby named Lacey from a poster I'd seen 3 blocks away, one I hadn't told her about yet. We were by the fence. She was deadheading something in her flower bed. She didn't look up. "The one with the kinked tail?" she said, like we were mid-conversation. I nodded slowly. The poster hadn't mentioned the tail. Maybe I missed a second flyer somewhere. Possible. I went back inside and stared at my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd taken. No tail note. Another day, I said I was going to stop by a shelter after work, and she was immediate. "Don't. I mean, you can, but you'll waste your time. They miss ID all the time. You'll just see sick cats and torture yourself." She softened it with a smile. "I hate seeing you worried." By then I noticed another pattern. When I brought up a missing cat by description, she'd supply the name. When I mentioned a street, she'd supply the house color, like she'd been there. She always had something specific. It might be normal for a vet who talks to everyone, sure, but the mesh of details came too clean. And then, sitting at my table with library stamps and returned book slips spread out, I replayed our last fence chat in my head. "Marvin had an unusual white triangle on his chest," she'd said casually, like she was telling me the weather again. That detail wasn't on any poster. A few days later, I came home from work and found an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return. Inside were 5 photos cut from posters and a note in block letters. "Ask the veterinarian." Hands shook. I checked street. Nobody. I locked door and spread photos on the table. Marvin's face was there, bell visible. Someone knew I'd been paying attention, or wanted me to blame Carol. Either way, it felt targeted. I didn't go to Carol. That would be reckless. If she was involved, I'd warn her. If she wasn't, I'd smear her for nothing. I put the envelope and the collar in my tote and set it by the door. I planned to go to the police first thing. That night I slept in pieces and replayed every chat. I kept picturing a hand sliding that envelope into my box while I was shelving returns. The next day, I went to the police. I brought the collar and the envelope, told the officer everything. He listened, then said, "The collar isn't proof. Cats lose collars." I told him I found it in her bin and it matched Marvin's photo. He said, "A note could be from anyone. We can't get a warrant on that he made a report," handed me a number, and that was it for now. Only, sorry. I walked out with paperwork and no plan. I called the non-emergency line and asked for extra patrols. "We'll note it," the dispatcher said. I posted a reminder about keeping pets indoors, avoided names, and closed app when comments turned into fights. At home, I slid the collar and note into a freezer bag and taped the bag inside a shoebox. It felt theatrical, but doing something was better than pacing and staring at fence. Over the next weeks, I avoided Carol. When she asked, "How's the library?" I said, "Busy," and kept moving. If she waved over the fence, I gave a wave back and looked away. Twice she asked about the missing cats, and I said I hadn't heard anything new, then mentioned a book display. I left through back door more. I changed trash times. I wasn't dramatic. I limited contact and kept my head down quietly. The disappearances stopped in October. No new posters went up. The ones curled and faded. On my walks, I still scanned poles and found nothing, just staples and tape marks. People relaxed. Kids played on the sidewalk. I thought about Marvin's owner and whether she took her posters down herself or ran out of hope. Part of me waited for one more flyer, so I could be wrong and right at the same time too. Carol kept the same routine. Early car start, late return, scrubs some days, hoodie others, packages on her porch, small talk with neighbors. She waved at me. I waved back because ignoring would invite questions. At night I heard sounds from her yard I couldn't place. One thump, a clink, a hose turning on briefly. Could be yard stuff. I'd open my camera app, then close it. You can't report a noise that could be anything. I still live here. I avoid Carol and keep it quiet. The posters stopped in October and I hope they stay stopped. Sometimes the night sounds from her yard make my shoulders tense, and I think about the collar in a shoebox and envelope with 5 faces. I never learned the truth. Not knowing sits under work and sleep. I hope the cat's safe now, and I'm afraid to know what happened to those 5. My name is Barbara. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in my house in the Phoenix suburbs my whole adult life. My husband passed away 4 years ago, and my kids grew up and moved out. Daughter in California, son in Colorado. I'm used to living alone and I value my independence. I have a garage where I keep gardening tools, old boxes, and my car. Usually I keep it closed, but sometimes I leave it open when I'm working in the yard. Last summer I came back from the grocery store and decided to organize some boxes in the garage. When I walked in, I immediately felt something was off. The rake that always stood on the left was now on the right. Boxes with Christmas decorations were in different places than I'd left them. Someone had clearly been in here, going through my things. I stood there trying to think if I'd moved them myself. I hadn't. I called the non-emergency line and an officer came by later. He looked around, asked me what was missing. I told him nothing, as far as I could tell. He said, "If the door was open, ma'am, someone might have just poked their head in." No sign of a forced entry. He gave me a little speech about locking doors, then said if I was worried, I should install a camera. My son sent me a simple security camera that records to a memory card, and I installed it in the corner of the garage about a week later. It wasn't complicated. Plug in, connect, angle it at the door. I checked the footage every couple of days, mostly fast-forwarding. 10 days after installation, I was reviewing the files and I saw him. A young man, maybe 25, in jeans and a dark t-shirt, walked into my garage around 2 in the afternoon. He didn't take anything valuable, just walked around, opened boxes, looked at my tools, then left. He even picked up my old garden shears like he was testing the weight of them, then set them down. His face was clearly visible on the camera. I paused the frame, stared at it, and took a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I saved the recording to my computer and called the police again. The woman on the phone said they'd send someone. It took 3 days. By that time, something else had happened. The day after I saw the recording, someone rang my doorbell around 10 in the morning. I opened it, and there he was, the same young man from the footage. He was smiling, holding a stack of flyers. "Morning," he said. "I'm new to the neighborhood, offering lawn care, mowing, trimming, raking. Name's Tyler." He spoke in a friendly way, casual, like a kid looking for summer work. I stood there looking at him, trying to keep calm. It was definitely him from the recording. My mouth went dry. I said, "I'll think about it and call if I need anything." He nodded, handed me a flyer with a phone number, and walked away at an easy pace, not even glancing at the camera above my porch. My hands were shaking when I closed the door. He'd acted completely natural, like we'd never met before, like he hadn't been in my garage. I called my daughter and showed her the recording over video chat. She went quiet, then said, "Mom, that's him. That's the same shirt. Call the police again." Today I told her they were already supposed to send someone. "Then call again," she said. "I don't like this." She asked if my doors were locked. I said yes. She asked if I had the flyer. I held it up to the camera. An officer came the next day, watched the recording at my kitchen table, and wrote down the information from the flyer. He asked a few basic questions. Did I know him? Had I hired anyone recently? What days I leave the garage open? I told him no, and only when I'm working outside. He nodded like he'd heard that 100 times. We'll check out this Tyler, he said, tapping the paper with his pen. The issue is, he didn't steal anything. He walked into an open garage and left. Technically, it could be trespassing, but these things can be tricky. Proving intent is difficult. We'll go talk to him. That night, I double-checked the back door, then the side gate. I moved the camera angle a little wider so it caught more of the interior. I put the flyer in a drawer and left my phone on loud. I didn't go out to the yard. I kept the garage closed. 2 days later, the officer called back and said he'd spoken with Tyler. Tyler denied everything, said he'd never been in my garage, and they had no grounds to arrest him. The flyer with his number wasn't proof of anything. The officer on the phone said they could document my complaint, swing by if a patrol car was nearby, and warn him not to step on my property again if they saw him. That was it. I hung up and stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand longer than made sense. I felt stuck. He lived just 2 blocks away, and he knew my garage, my porch, my face. I kept thinking how calm he'd been, how easy that smile came out of him. My daughter called that evening and went straight into logistics. Condo listings near her, cost of movers, timelines. My son texted 3 links to apartments near him and wrote, "You shouldn't be there alone." I said I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't leaving my house because some guy rifled through a box of Christmas lights. It was stubborn, yes, but it was also about not letting someone take something from me that wasn't theirs. That night, I slept bad. I got up twice, checked the front door, then the slider, then the garage entry door from the kitchen. I kept telling myself to stop, and then I did it again anyway. The next morning, I installed a second deadbolt on the laundry room door and moved the camera angle in the garage again so it covered the back wall too. I started keeping the garage closed even when I was working in the yard. If I needed the rake, I pulled it out and shut the door behind me. I hated how jumpy I'd become. Every knock at the door made me pause and look through the peephole longer than normal. I stopped answering if I didn't recognize the person. A week later, around noon, I saw him again. I was taking trash to the bin when a bicycle came down the street slow, like he was coasting. Tyler. Same age, same relaxed posture. He didn't stop. He just looked at my house as he passed and kept going. He didn't look at me. That look fixed itself in my head, like he was taking a picture of the place. I stood in the driveway until he turned the corner. I went inside, locked the door, and called the non-emergency line again. I told them he'd ridden by and looked. The dispatcher said, "Okay, we'll note it." I asked if they'd warned him. She said the officer had made contact, told him to stay away, and that he denied everything, which I already knew. I said I understood. I hung up and made tea I didn't drink. I started thinking about what he'd been looking for in my garage. He didn't take tools, didn't take the old camping stove, didn't try the car. He opened boxes. He touched my things. Maybe he was checking if I lived alone. Maybe he wanted something easy he could sell. Or maybe he liked the feeling of going through someone's life without them knowing. I don't know. That uncertainty started to weigh more than the fear. It made regular tasks feel complicated. I kept the blinds half closed. I parked the car inside every time and hit the button to close the door before I even got out. I told my daughter I would think about moving. She said, "Please." I held out for 3 months, but eventually I gave up and moved to Colorado, to an apartment near my son and his family. I rent out the house now. A nice young couple lives there. I think about that situation sometimes, especially at night. The police said Tyler had no criminal record, that he was just a guy offering lawn services, and maybe the whole thing was some weird misunderstanding. But I saw the recording. I saw him going through my boxes, looking at my things, touching them. And then the next day, he showed up at my door with that friendly smile, acting like nothing had happened. Sometimes I wonder if he went into the garage again after I moved out, if he bothered the new tenants. My son says I made the right decision, that I shouldn't have been alone in that big house anyway. I know he's right about the practical parts. Still, I feel like Tyler won somehow, like he pushed me out of my own home. I never found out what he was looking for or why he came back pretending to be a helpful neighbor. So I moved to Sedona, Arizona about 6 weeks ago after my divorce. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere I could think. I rented a small house on the edge of town near hiking trails and red rocks. My neighbor Travis introduced himself on day 2. He was around 50, tan and lean, said he'd lived here 20 years and worked as a canyon guide. He knew every trail within 50 miles. Travis seemed friendly, brought a welcome basket with local wine and a trail map. If you want to see the real Arizona, not the tourist stuff, let me know. I'll show you places tours don't go. I thanked him but said I was still settling in. First 2 weeks I'd see Travis occasionally. He'd wave from his window or stop to chat about weather, local restaurants, trail safety. Nothing weird. Little things felt off in that first stretch. But I blamed the divorce hangover and the different light here. A tire track appeared across the dirt beside my fence that wasn't mine. One night I heard a slow car pass twice around midnight. I told myself I was being jumpy. New town, new routines. 3 weeks ago, Travis knocked on my door Saturday morning. I opened in house clothes, coffee in hand. He was in hiking gear, backpack, boots, hat, and said, "I'm checking out a trail I haven't visited in a while. Perfect day, not too hot. Wanna come?" Moderate difficulty, incredible views. I hesitated. It was Saturday. I needed distraction from thoughts about my ex, and Travis seemed like a normal neighbor. I agreed, changed into athletic wear, grabbed water and phone. We drove in his Jeep 20 minutes on the highway, then turned onto a dirt road. We parked at a trailhead. Nobody around, just desert landscape and red rocks. Travis checked my backpack, gave me an energy bar and said, "Stay behind me, some sections are narrow." I told him I'd follow his lead. I sent my sister a quick text with a pin, which is something I do now. At first, the hike was calm. I kept a few steps behind, watching his boots find sure places. He asked about my job, if I worked remote, if anyone was visiting soon. Normal questions, but lined up like a checklist. I answered loosely because that's how I've been since the divorce. Polite, vague. He smiled and said I had good trail instincts. About 20 minutes in, I noticed he didn't talk much when other trails branched off. He'd just say, "Not that way, too sandy," and keep us moving. We passed a faded warning sign face down on the ground. He stepped over it like it didn't matter. I told myself he was a pro and knew better than old signage. He set a steady pace, nothing reckless. "Just keep your right hand on the wall," he said, demonstrating. I did it. It was fine. After that, I felt more alert. He wasn't creepy exactly. It was more like he needed me where he expected me. I told myself not to be unfair. We hiked about 40 minutes, trail gradually climbing up, cliff on one side and increasingly deep drop on the other. Views really were amazing. I took photos and Travis smiled. "Told you tourists don't see this." The trail got really narrow, about 3 feet wide, cliff wall on right, 40-foot drop on left with sharp rocks at bottom. Travis was walking ahead, then stopped and said, "Best view is from here. Come to the edge, just be careful." I approached, holding the rock wall with my hand, looked down, heart jumped, very high. Travis stood behind me, not right up against me but close, about 3 feet away. I felt uncomfortable. Something about his position was wrong. He started speaking in a calm voice. 3 tourists died here in the last 10 years. One couple 3 years ago, taking a selfie, slipped. Guy tried to catch the girl. Both fell. I turned around, stepped away from the edge, tried to joke. "Well, you're really scaring me now. Let's move away from here." But Travis didn't move, looked at me strangely. "One man a year ago. Locals say suicide, but who knows? Fell from this exact spot. They only found him 3 days later." I felt cold run down my spine. Travis was standing between me and the wider part of the trail. I couldn't get past him without getting closer to the drop. He continued, "Strange, right? People come here alone, and then they're found at the bottom. No witnesses, just an accident." His voice sounded almost thoughtful, but something in the tone was off. I tried to stay calm and pulled out my phone, said, "Great spot. Let me send photos to my friends, tell them where we are." I opened Maps, took a screenshot of the location, and sent it to a group chat with 3 friends with the message, "Amazing trail with neighbor. Travis, here's the coordinates." Hit send very demonstratively so he could see. Travis instantly changed, stepped back, tone became light and friendly. "Great idea. Always need to tell someone where you are. Safety first." He turned and walked back down the trail quickly. "Okay, let's head back. I promised you moderate difficulty, not extreme." I walked behind him, staying close to the cliff wall, heart pounding. On the way back, Travis talked non-stop about evening plans, new restaurant in town, changing weather. Like nothing happened. When we got to the Jeep, I said I felt a bit sick. Probably the sun, needed to go home. Travis nodded understandingly, drove me in silence. At home, I quickly thanked him and went inside, locked the door. That evening, I called my friend Rachel, who's lived in Sedona 5 years. I told her about the hike without saying my suspicions directly, just described the situation. Rachel was quiet, then said, "Travis McDonald? You live next to him? Listen." She told me that 3 years ago, Travis's wife Linda died falling from a cliff during a hike. They were alone. Travis said she slipped on a narrow trail. He couldn't hold her. Investigation ruled it an accident, but Linda's brother didn't believe it. Linda was an experienced hiker, never careless. He tried to push for reinvestigation, but there was no evidence. 1.5 years after Linda's death, a female tourist from California went missing. Her car was found at a trailhead near Travis's house, but she was never found. Some locals said they saw Travis talking to her that day. I took notes while she talked. Not because I wanted drama, but because I needed a record of dates and names. After we hung up, I emailed myself the coordinates, the timestamps, a summary of what happened at the ledge, and sent the same to my sister. If something felt off tomorrow, there would be a breadcrumb trail. Next morning, I went to the sheriff's substation. I told the deputy I needed to file an information report, not an emergency. I explained the hike, my neighbor, the position at the ledge, the change after I sent the pin. I gave them Travis's full name and address. The deputy was professional. Not enough for a case, but he logged it, added my screenshots, told me to call 911 if he stepped on my property or tried to isolate me again. He suggested a simple safety plan. Vary routes, keep someone looped in, don't meet him alone. I changed my routines. I parked in the garage with the door down. I moved a chair under the back doorknob at night and put a cheap camera in the window facing the side yard. Monday, Travis waved from his porch like usual. I nodded, nothing more. A flyer went up in town about a missing hiker from another county. It made me feel stupid for ever letting my guard down. Tuesday, someone rattled my gate around dusk. Not hard, just testing. The camera caught a shadow and the top of a hat brim. Could have been a delivery guy. Could have been a kid. I saved the clip anyway. Wednesday, he knocked. "Hey neighbor," cheerful, holding 2 smoothies. "Peace offering for scaring you on that ledge. I shouldn't have told those stories." I kept the door latched, thanked him, said I wasn't up for visitors. He didn't push. He set the cups on the step and said there was a quieter trail he could show me. Safer. Wider. I said I was taking a break from hiking with anyone. He nodded, smiled too long, then left. By Friday, I had a plan. 2 friends agreed to drive up for the weekend and stay with me. I told the deputy. I also called my landlord about early termination. She said there was a wait list, and she'd help if I found a replacement. That night, a car rolled slow past my house. Then again. I wrote down the plate, but 1 digit might be wrong. Around 10, Travis texted me a link to a sunset photo. No message, just the image. I replied, "Please stop contacting me." He sent a thumbs up. Saturday, my friends arrived. We packed most of my stuff into bins and moved boxes to their SUV. We took turns watching the driveway. Late evening, I saw Travis in his yard, arms crossed. Rachel called and said she'd spoken to Linda's brother, who still kept a file. I told her I was leaving town for a while. At dawn Sunday, we loaded the last things. As I backed out, Travis lifted a hand to wave. I drove away without waving back. I don't know what Travis has or hasn't done. I'm not the person who can decide that. What I do know is the moment someone turns a cliff into a lesson about accidents while standing between you and the safe path, you listen to your gut, you document, and you get out. Starting over isn't being nice to strangers who make your skin crawl. It's choosing to stay alive. I filed the report, I told everyone, and I left before the trail got narrow again. During the fall of 2020, I rented a room in this elderly lady's house in Seattle. I was transferring to med school and trying to find a cheap place near campus. Money was tight because of the pandemic, and every listing felt like a trap or a scam. Mrs. Patterson was 72, a widow, and she rented the room on the 2nd floor. When we met, she seemed kind, offered me tea, walked me through the house like a tour guide who didn't want to waste my time. She said she liked things clean and hoped I did too. I told her I was neat. She nodded, pleased, and handed me a spare set of keys. The first 2 weeks were fine. I went to class, came back, studied at the desk by the window. Sometimes she cooked and asked if I wanted to eat together. She talked about her husband, who died 5 years earlier, and her son who lived out of state. I listened and made a point to be respectful. Wash my dishes right away, wipe the counter, that kind of thing. She seemed to relax around me. Once she left a plate of cookies at my door with a note, "For fuel." I texted thanks. Nothing weird then. Just quiet. The changes started in week 3. One morning I came down for coffee and she was on her hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor even though it already looked spotless. I said, "Morning," but she didn't respond. Just kept scrubbing the same spot like there was something there only she could see. I poured coffee and backed out. That evening she asked me to take off my shoes on the porch, not just inside the door. "Less dirt," she said. I said sure, seemed reasonable. The next day it was, Wash your hands as soon as you enter, please. Germs are everywhere, I said. Okay. A day later. Only eat in the kitchen, at the table. Then, wash hands before touching doorknobs. The rules stacked up like notes on the fridge. She started cleaning 6, maybe 7 hours a day. Vacuuming, mopping, wiping every flat surface, washing curtains like it was a ritual. The house reeked of bleach and sanitizer. My eyes watered during Zoom lectures. When I tried to say gently that it felt a bit much, she looked at me like I'd said something dangerous. She leaned closer and whispered, "The germs are everywhere. They're killing people." I tried to keep the peace. Pandemic anxiety was chewing on everyone, right? I figured she just needed routine. But by early November, it turned into pressure. She began setting a timer for my hand washing. 20 minutes, every 20 minutes. If I missed it, she'd knock. Not gentle. Knuckles on wood until I answered. "Hands, Ryan," she'd say through the door. She banned me from the living room because I carried bacteria. I was allowed in my room and the kitchen only for meals. If I brought a glass of water upstairs, she'd stand in the hall until I brought it back down. No food or drink in the bedroom, she'd remind me, showing me a printed list of house rules like a hotel policy sheet. She woke up at 3 a.m. and vacuumed. Furniture scraped across the floors. I'd lie there staring at practice questions on my phone that I wouldn't remember later, listening to the machine thrum across every room. Sleep got thin and jittery. I bombed a quiz and my instructor emailed asking if everything was okay. I looked in the mirror and saw the same guy, only more hollow. I thought about moving out, but in November of 2020, nobody wanted new tenants. Listings dried up, campus housing was restricted, and I didn't want to couch surf mid-semester. I told myself to hold on until finals. I was 26, medical student, supposed to be adaptable. I set alarms for hand washing just to stop the knocking and tried to tune out the vacuum. Then the chemicals arrived. She started ordering bulk cleaning products. Huge containers of bleach, ammonia, acidic bathroom cleaners with hazard labels that made me nervous. She lined them on the laundry room floor like supplies for a war. She didn't wear gloves, no mask, no goggles. She mixed them in buckets, poured them into spray bottles, moved room to room, misting every doorknob and light switch and the air around them. I caught a smell that made my throat close and I stepped back. "You can't mix those," I said. "The fumes are toxic." I said it calmly. I told her I'd done undergraduate research in a lab and we had training about this exact thing. She waved me off. "I know what I'm doing," she said. Her hands were red and cracked. She poured anyway, bleach into a basin that already smelled like ammonia. I felt my eyes sting and said, "Mrs. Patterson, seriously. That combination forms chloramines. It can hurt your lungs." She didn't look at me. She kept her gaze on the bucket like she was following a recipe, and the recipe had no substitutions. "Step back if you're worried," she said. "I'm not spreading sickness in my house." I opened the back door to vent the room and she closed it with her hip. Cold air brings in more germs. She set a kitchen timer and shook the spray bottle like she was priming it. I took another step away and tried again, slower. It's not just about cold air. That mix can send you to the ER. She tightened the sprayer nozzle and gave me a look that was part fear, part stubborn. "Hospitals are full of germs," she said. "I won't go there." She bent over the bucket again, poured the rest of the bleach, and said she had to kill every last microbe. It hit me the moment I cracked the front door. A harsh chemical wall that burned my eyes and grabbed my throat. I coughed and tasted something bitter. I covered my nose with my sleeve and stepped in because I had to see what she'd done and stop it fast. Mrs. Patterson stood in the kitchen, pumping a sprayer at the walls like she was watering plants. White foam slid down the cabinets. The floor was slick. On the stove sat open jugs, bleach and ammonia side by side. fumes hanging like heat off asphalt. "What are you doing?" I yelled. My voice sounded small under the ringing in my ears. She turned, face red, eyes inflamed, breathing heavy like she'd run stairs. "Disinfection," she said. "Full disinfection." She went right back to spraying as if the question was out of line. I knew instantly what it was. Bleach plus ammonia. Chloramines. The lab safety poster from undergrad just flashed in my head like a pop-up. Problem mode. Ventilate. Separate the source. Get her out. I went for the nearest window. The latch stuck. My hands were slick and useless. My chest tightened, a hot pressure under my sternum. "You have to stop," I said, and it broke into a cough that stung all the way down. She kept talking about germs living on surfaces and the air carrying shedding, like people were leaving a film behind them. The sprayer hissed without stopping. I stepped toward the back door and my shoe skated on the foam. I caught the counter and felt the edge bite my palm. My phone was in my other hand because 911 was the only smart move, but the screen was a blur through tears. I swiped anyway, got the code wrong, tried again. The room tilted like I was on a boat. I felt stupid for not keeping an inhaler in my pocket, even though I don't have asthma. Air turned into knives. I dropped to one knee because standing cost too much oxygen. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, "you're poisoning us." She didn't answer. She said something about case numbers and "no one is taking this seriously," and sprayed the doorway I needed. I crawled for the front because I knew I could unlock it faster. The deadbolt always stuck in the cold, and it fought me now. I twisted, missed, twisted again. My fingers wouldn't grip right. The edges of the room dimmed. The smell got sharper near the floor, and my hands slid in the foam. I had one deep cough that felt like tearing. I remember her silhouette against the kitchen light, arm moving in a steady rhythm, and the sprayer hissing like a leak. Then nothing. I woke up to a ceiling tile and a quiet hiss at my nose. Oxygen prongs, beeps in and out. A nurse said my name and told me where I was, that I was stable, that my lungs were irritated from chloramine exposure. She asked me for slow breaths. I did exactly what she said because I didn't have a better plan. When I asked how I got there, she said a man found me and called 911. It was her son. He told me later he had planned to visit that weekend anyway, to check gutters and bring groceries. He called at 6, she didn't answer, and that set him off because she always answered on the first ring. He drove over. The smell hit him at the walkway. He pulled his hoodie over his face, opened the door, and found me at the kitchen threshold. He dragged me to the entry, kicked the door wide, and called. He found his mother on the couch, still gripping the sprayer, and dragged her toward the air until she slumped. We were both treated for chloramine inhalation. I stayed 3 days. Breathing felt like work I had to clock in for. A respiratory therapist taught me exercises and told me to listen to my chest, not my pride. The attending said I was lucky. Mrs. Patterson was stabilized and transferred to psych. Her son told me the psychiatrist's words: severe OCD, long-standing, pushed into a dangerous place by isolation and the daily death counts. He kept apologizing. I told him he didn't have to. He packed my things, sent photos so I could approve what to keep, and left the key for the landlord. I didn't go back. More than a year later, I still wake from dreams where I smell bleach and can't find a door. I check labels by reflex. I don't ignore creeping rules anymore, mine or anyone else's, because small concessions pile up until there's no room to breathe. I don't hate her, and I don't excuse it. Fear took her somewhere rigid and dangerous, and it almost took me with her. When the soap stings the same old spots on my hands, I think of her cracked knuckles, that pump sprayer, and her saying the germs had to be killed at any cost. Me and Emily bought a house in a Denver suburb 4 months ago. First property, huge deal, 30-year mortgage. Our neighbor to the right, Dennis Wilson, introduced himself moving day. He was tall, solid, wearing a Denver Fire Department shirt. Said he'd worked as a firefighter 32 years. Retired now. Dennis seemed friendly, helped us carry some boxes, told us about the area, best supermarket, trash pickup days, local service numbers. Mentioned he lives alone after his wife died 5 years ago. We thanked him, and for the first 2 weeks he was a regular neighbor. Waved over the fence, sometimes brought mail if it went to his place by mistake. Then the night started. It was small stuff at first. A faint smell in the garage that made Emily wrinkle her nose, which I said was the old water heater. A dark patch on our bedroom ceiling that looked like a shadow until morning proved it was uneven paint. Twice our doorbell camera pinged at 2 a.m. and showed nothing but a moth. We joked about the house settling in, like it was the one nervous about us. Meanwhile, Dennis's questions got oddly specific. Did we get the dryer vent cleaned? Were the detectors hardwired? Where was our gas shut off? Practical, sure, but it felt like he was interviewing us for a job we already had. One afternoon, he saw me fiddling with the grill and walked over with a fire extinguisher already in his hand. I laughed. He didn't. He put it down by my foot and said, "Keep this here." I told Emily that night he had firefighter brain that never turned off. She said, "As long as it stays daytime, it's fine." First time was 3 a.m. on week 3. Loud banging on the door, then the doorbell. Insistent, several times. I woke up in a full jolt, ran to the entry. Emily jumped up behind me, phone in her hand. I opened the door, and there was Dennis in pajama pants and a t-shirt, flashlight in my face, eyes wide. "Fire! Do you smell smoke? Get out now, right now, only take documents." I looked around, sniffed. No smoke, no smell, nothing. "Dennis, what fire? Everything's fine." He leaned in, aimed the light down our hallway, up at the ceiling. "You sure?" I smelled smoke. "Check the kitchen, the stove, electrical panel." Emily walked through the house, checked everything, nothing. Dennis stood at the threshold 5 more minutes, scanning, breathing fast, before finally swallowing and saying, "Okay, must have been wrong. Sorry. Just be careful." We closed the door. Emily said, "Maybe a nightmare?" I said, "Maybe." The morning after, he apologized over the fence. Said wind can carry smells weird at night. I told him no problem, better safe than sorry. That afternoon I tested every smoke detector and replaced 2 batteries. Cheap peace of mind. Emily teased me for turning the house into a cockpit. She slept easier that night. For one night. It happened again 4 days later. Again 3 a.m. Banging, bell, Dennis with the flashlight. "Smoke. I saw smoke from your window." Again nothing. Then 3 days later. Then 2 days later. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. He'd bang, shout about fire, insist we check every room. Emily started crying from exhaustion around the 4th time. On the 6th, I stepped outside and shut the door behind me so Emily could breathe. "Dennis, there's no fire. There never was. You can't do this. We need to sleep." He looked hurt, but defiant. "I'm worried about you. Better safe than sorry. I've seen houses burned down in minutes. You don't understand." He said it like an obituary he'd written too many times. I told him we appreciated the concern, but this had to stop. He backed away, still scanning our eaves with the light, then wandered home. By then I had a system. Shoes by the bed, passports in a zip pouch, breaker labeled neatly, extinguisher on every floor because what if we were wrong one night? Emily suggested an inspection so we could show him something official. That made sense. I booked HVAC and an electrician. both walked the place, checked vents, stove, panel, attic insulation, the whole thing. Clean bill of health. We printed the invoices and I slid them into a folder. It felt silly and also necessary, like we were going to a parent-teacher conference about our house. 2 nights later, he was back. Same routine. Same glare of light in my eyes. I stepped out and pulled the door shut behind me. "Dennis," I said, holding up the paperwork. "We had everything inspected." "We're good." He barely glanced. "Inspections miss things," he said. "I've pulled bodies out of houses that passed every check." He wasn't threatening. He was flat. A porch across the street flicked on and off. "We can't keep doing this," I said. "Please. We will call if there's a problem." He nodded, slow but not agreeing, and walked away with the flashlight still on. Next morning I went to the neighbor on the left, Mark. Saturday, bins out, easy excuse. We'd only waved before. He opened his garage and saw me and already looked tired. "Hey, I'm Alex from next door," I said. "We've been getting late-night visits from Dennis." Mark nodded like he knew the script. "Dennis." "Yeah." He rubbed his jaw, leaned on a bike. "He has PTSD from the service," he said. "Was at several bad fires where people died. Since then, he's paranoid about fire. Previous owners of your house complained too. But what can you do? He's not dangerous, just sick." At first I tried to ignore the late nights, but the knocking wasn't the only problem. I started seeing Dennis in our side yard from the bedroom window around 1 or 2, slow loops with his flashlight, sweeping the beam over the siding, up under the eaves, then right across the glass. He'd pause and aim it into our living room like he was checking a stage. I told myself he was walking a dog, except he doesn't have a dog. When the light cut across the hallway again, Emily said, "That's not okay." I agreed. I still didn't call anyone. I wanted to believe he would stop. 2 nights later, Emily went to the kitchen for water and came face to face with him in the window. She screamed so loud I thought she'd fallen. I ran downstairs and yanked the back door open. Dennis stood inches from the glass, flashlight raised, calm like he was doing inventory. He said he was checking for smoke, that he saw something coming from the vent. I told him, "Plain, you can't look into people's windows at night. It's illegal. We will call police." He raised his hands and said, "Okay." He only wanted to help. He took 2 steps back but didn't leave. The next day there were 3 new smoke detectors mounted outside by our front door, screwed into the trim. He didn't ask. They chirped when the sun hit them. I took them down, walked them to his porch, and set them there. That night they were back up. I took them down again in the morning and left a note. "Please stop." He said through the fence that he bought them because our house sits on a corner and wine makes fire tricky. Emily said this isn't normal, and we needed to act. We closed the blinds at dusk and left the porch light on all night. I called the non-emergency line and asked what to do. The dispatcher said to call back when it was happening. I told Dennis, face to face, no more looking in windows and no more gadgets on our walls. He nodded and asked if our attic fan was on a timer. That night, his light made another slow pass across our bedroom. I stood there and watched the glow move along the wall and realized we were out of favors and excuses. 2 weeks ago, I woke at 2:30 to the sound of water, a steady hiss that didn't fit any appliance. I looked out and saw spray in the motion light. I went outside in bare feet, and Dennis was in our backyard in rubber boots, hosing down the siding like he was washing a car. Water poured into Emily's flower bed and turned the soil to soup. "Dennis! What the hell are you doing?" He didn't flinch. "Preventing fire," he said. "This wall is dry, burns easily. Wet surface doesn't burn." I reached for the nozzle and he jerked it away and blasted the roof. I grabbed his forearm to push the stream down and he shoved me, not hard but aggressive. "Back off," he said. You'll all burn. I backed away and called police. They showed about 20 minutes later. By then the hose was off. An officer said they couldn't arrest him for watering a house and asked for a contact. Mark gave me his daughter Sarah's number. She came next day, apologized, said he refuses treatment and won't listen. I lock up and try to ignore it. He sits on his porch and watches our house. It happened last spring when me and my partner Kevin bought a house in a quiet suburb outside Nashville. Small ranch, 2 bedrooms, big backyard we said we'd turn into a garden. We'd been together 4 years, and buying a place felt like finally putting a stake in the ground. It hit me harder than I expected because a year before that I'd told my parents I was gay, and it went badly. My mom cried. My dad didn't speak to me for a month. Things stayed stiff after. Kevin kept saying, "Let's make our own place feel solid." And that became our project. First week was paint on our forearms, IKEA hex keys everywhere, arguing about whether the couch faced the window or the TV. Neighbors waved when they drove by. Across the street, an older woman, Mrs. Langford, brought a pie the day we moved in. She smiled, said, "Welcome, boys." Best of luck, we thanked her, said we'd bring the pie dish back. It felt normal. Easy. A week later, it changed. I was heading to my car in the morning, saw Mrs. Langford watering her flowers. I said, "Good morning," and gave this friendly little wave. She looked right at me, face flat, turned around, and went inside without a word. That night, Kevin told me she'd done the same to him. I said hey, and she practically pivoted like I'd spit on her steps. We tried to shrug it off. Next day we were both in the yard, hands in the dirt, putting in little boxwoods. Mrs. Langford came onto her porch, stared long enough that I stood up. Then she made the sign of the cross, slow, careful, like she wanted to be sure we saw. Kevin went pale and whispered, "She figured it out." I squeezed his wrist. We went inside, and the house felt smaller. The following morning I opened the mailbox and found a religious pamphlet. Red marker underlined verses about abomination, heavy strokes that bled through. No note, no name, just the red lines. The next week slid into something I didn't have a word for. Neighbors who waved now pretended to be busy with their phones. One woman crossing our side of the street crossed back when she saw me. Someone spray-painted perverts on our fence one night, shaky letters that still landed like a punch. I covered it before work, matched the paint as best I could, took a breath, told myself it was done. A week later, it showed up again on the garage door. Kevin found all 4 tires on his car flat early one morning, punctures you could feel with a fingertip. Whoever did it took their time, he said, crouched there, staring like the rubber could answer him. We called the police. The officer who came out listened, filled out a report and said, "Without a camera or a witness, it's tough to pin it to someone. Document everything. We'll keep an eye out." His tone wasn't rude, just tired. Then the calls started. 3 in the morning, my phone buzzing off the nightstand, a man using some app to twist his voice, whispering scripture about Sodom and Gomorrah. I hung up. He called back from a different number. Heavy breathing. "You don't belong here," he said once, almost casual, like he was telling me the weather. "Leave before it gets worse." I blocked numbers until my recent calls list looked like a graveyard. I stopped answering anything I didn't recognize. Kevin suggested changing numbers. I said then they win, which sounded stupid the second it left my mouth. But I couldn't think of a better rule to live by at 3 a.m. He stretched out beside me in the dark, not touching, both of us wired and wide awake until the alarm went off. 2 mornings later, I opened the garage and found a paper grocery bag tipped over by the door. Not trash, just the bag on its side like someone had set it there and nudged it with their foot. I froze, counted to 5, then nudged it with my shoe. Nothing inside. I told Kevin about it, and he nodded too quickly and said, "Okay," like he was agreeing with a doctor. We started parking on the street. It felt safer because it made no sense, but we were rationalizing seconds as they came. I tried to keep my world tight. Work, home, sleep that wasn't sleep. At work, my boss asked me into his office. He had that concerned face people use when they're about to ask something they don't want to ask. "HR got an anonymous letter," he said. "It claims you've been making inappropriate comments to a junior employee." I laughed too loud because it was so off base it felt like a joke. Then my boss slid a copy across the desk. The handwriting looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. Blocky, cramped, until I realized it reminded me of those red lines, just in pen instead of marker. I told him it wasn't true. He said he believed me. HR believed me too when we sat down to talk. They were professional, asked specifics, documented everything. "We have to look into any report," the HR manager said. "You understand." I said I did, and I did. But I still felt my cheeks burn walking out of that room. By the end of that week, I noticed the quiet pause after I walked into the break room. Small thing, nothing you could quote, but people get careful when they think there's a story you're not telling. I kept my eyes down, did my job, pretended my phone wasn't buzzing with a new unknown number. They believed me. They said it wasn't going to follow me, but some colleagues looked at me now with suspicion. It all peaked when my parents called in a panic. They'd received an envelope with no return address, photos of our house, our car, and shots of me and Kevin in the yard, taken from the street. A note said, "Your son chose sin. Let God judge him." My mom sobbed in the phone. My dad took over and told me to sell the house and get out now. Kevin stood by the counter, pale, hands shaking, and kept saying, "It's our home. We can't just give up." I told him I agreed, but I could see the fear he was trying to hide, and I knew it matched mine. After that, we stayed inside. We kept the back door locked and the porch dark. Sleep turned into short bursts, broken by cars passing or a dog bark. I lost weight without trying. Kevin asked his doctor for something to calm his nerves because his chest pounded at night. We started snapping at each other over small things, trash, lights, keys, because it was easier than saying we were scared all day. One night I woke up and he wasn't there. I found him in the kitchen with a knife in his hand, watching the window like it might move. He whispered, "I just want to be ready." I took the knife from him, put it back, and sat with him until morning. After sunrise, I said, "We can't live like this." He nodded. We said nothing else. In June, Mrs. Langford organized a neighborhood meeting about safety. Kevin said we shouldn't go. I told him we needed to look people in the eye and hear what they'd say in a room. The community center had maybe 20 neighbors. Mrs. Langford talked about protecting families, preserving the character of the street. She didn't say our names, but everyone knew. A young mom from across the way stood and said she didn't understand what danger we were, that we were polite and quiet. A man by the door agreed. Mrs. Langford's voice tightened. She started shouting about morals and God, and then blurted, "I know what they do in there. I see them. They kiss in the kitchen. They hold hands. They call their parents and complain about us." The room went still. Someone asked how she knew what we did in our kitchen. Was she watching us? She froze. Another neighbor said he'd heard about the harassing calls and the letter at my work. A man in the back said he saw her by our fence late at night with a spray can. He said he didn't want drama, but he saw what he saw. We went to the police again, this time with names and statements. A judge issued a restraining order keeping her 100 meters from us. She still lives across the street. We see her in her front window. She watches our house for hours and writes in a small notebook. The order doesn't forbid looking. Kevin installed blinds on every window. We almost never open the curtains now. Each morning I walk outside first and check both cars before we leave. We've talked about moving, and then we stop because it's ours, and we say out loud that leaving would mean they won. We keep records, every date and time, like the officer said now. Most days that holds. Some days it doesn't. But we stay. And every afternoon when I turn into the driveway, I look at her window and see her shape behind the curtain. And I know she's still there, still watching, still waiting, still.